Dr. Malay Mahadevia, my distinguished panelists, Jainarayan Bhai and Mukesh Bhai, and the AMA fraternity, who have been so enthusiastic participants in budget discussions over last 4 decades. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be in your midst this evening. We may not be able to see each other physically, but the virtual contact is good enough. And I very warmly welcome all those who have joined this panel discussion on Union Budget 21-22. Let me begin by saying that every budget is presented in the context of the circumstances that prevail in the preceding year, and more particularly in the preceding few months. Finance ministers in India have had the pleasure and privilege and the challenge to present budget in most testing, most challenging, most difficult times also. I mean, Manmohan Singh presented a budget like that in 1991 when Indian economy was going through crisis. Thereafter, we had the situations in 2008, global financial crisis. So, challenging situations and challenging environments have not been a new thing for the country. However, 2020 cannot be compared with any of those years. The economic crisis of 1991 or Southeast Asian crisis of 1997 or global financial crisis of 2007-2008 would pale into insignificance as compared to the COVID-19 related crisis that India faced and the entire world faced. This is something unprecedented in terms of scale, magnitude, impact, intensity. You take any parameter, and this is something which is absolutely unprecedented. The world economy contracted in 2008. In 2009, the world GDP growth was negative. Prior to that, the world was growing at an average of 5%, and the world economy went down by almost 4% in the global economic crisis of 2009. This time, the world economy is going to shrink. The GDP, global GDP in 2020 would be substantially lower than the global GDP of 2019. And what is important is that there is hardly any country in the world which has not experienced negative growth. But the substantial difference between the global financial crisis of 2008-2009 versus 2020 is that when the rest of the world was going down massively, Indian economy grew at more than 6% in the year of crisis. India and China were the leading lights of the world. And in fact, IMF had to say that the global GDP would have declined by a much larger amount had it not been for the contribution of India and China. 2020, the situation is very different. While all advanced countries have experienced negative growth, India's negative growth has far exceeded the negative growth recorded by most countries in the world. And we have gone down, as per the latest available official estimates, by 7.7%. 7.7% contraction of real GDP is the highest ever contraction in India. But what is important is that since inflation was not very high, our nominal GDP is going down by 4.5%. And that is something which is unprecedented in the history, 70-year post-independent history in India. Our nominal GDP growth has never been negative. So we are facing a situation which is first time ever. And so it requires a response which is also first time ever. Larger the challenge, larger should be the response. Now, we need to evaluate the budget in this context. I mean, we were criticized widely as one of the worst performing economies in the world. In the year 2016-17, we were the fastest growing economy in the world. We had overtaken China, we had overtaken everybody else. In 2020, we are one of the worst performing economies in the world. And if you look at the top 20 large countries of the world, we were the worst in the entire lot. Now, it is therefore a question of not just revival, but many felt that it is a question of survival. Whether we as a large economy will be able to withstand this sort of an onslaught. And in relation to that, we had a finance minister who had been least experienced. She presented the first budget in 2019 July, second one in February 2020, and this was going to be her third budget. And people were not very enthused by the performance of the first two. And so there were all sorts of doubts, apprehensions, misgivings. And she had to take all this and then come out and perform. I can't help but compare this with the Indian cricket team that entered Gabba in Brisbane, where the combined experience of India's bowlers was 3 tests as compared to the opposition, which had more than 1,000 tests under their belt. We had relatively inexperienced batting side, relatively inexperienced bowling side. And so everybody had written us off. It was under that circumstance that we had to challenge a formidable side. And you know what happened. Now, in the context of all these problems that the Indian economy faced, with complete disaster in manufacturing, complete disaster in the service sector, negative growth rates of very high order of magnitude, the silver linings were that our WPI inflation was under reasonable control. Our current account deficit had evaporated thanks to the complete stagnation in the economy. But then the point is that the stagnation in the world and negative growth also meant that our export revenues dried up. Our export growth was massively negative. Our import growth was also negative, but all put together, we generated a current account surplus. Current account surplus of almost 2% of GDP, which is something that happened after 17 years. We had a largest record amount of kitty, foreign exchange kitty. So on external front, we had substantial strength. Now the issue was that what do you do under the circumstances? The massive slowdown meant that there was no tax revenue coming up. All streams of revenue dried up. Divestment targets dried up. If you look at the numbers, then there was a shortfall of 466,000 crores. That is 4,66,000 crores in revenue receipts. There was a huge gap of 1,78,000 crores in divestment target. Against 2,10,000 crores, we achieved only 32,000. As far as the tax revenue is concerned, we had planned 16,36,000 crore budgeted, and we could achieve only 13,44,000, which almost 3 lakh crore was the deficit in taxes. So with no resources coming from anywhere, the only way to ensure that there is damage control and minimization was to open the purse strings of the government and spend. And that is when me and my distinguished colleague Jainaran Bhai, we had been debating these things, and we felt in April and May that the government is not going to loosen the strings and we are going to be terribly affected. And the first quarter GDP growth of almost 24% negative proved our worst fears true. But I must say that what happened in the remaining period after May was something that nobody anticipated. And therefore, let me tell you that there was no debate or discussion whether what should be the prime objective of this budget. The primary objective of this budget had to be growth. It was to put the economy back on the path of sustainable growth. It was not a question of rebound in 21. It was a question of ensuring that the damage done by 2020 is behind and you are on a path of sustainable high rate of growth over the next several years. That was the challenge. It was not looking at 21. It was looking at minimum 5 years and maybe more. So the budget should not only be growth oriented, but it should lay foundation of a strong India for the years to come. And that was the whole purpose. And in the process, find methods of doing it in such a way that you don't get into any kind of trap. In growth economics, there are all sorts of traps around, and you don't fall into any one of those traps. Now, I must tell you that a good budget requires the finance minister to have clarity. Clarity of vision, clarity of purpose, clarity of objectives. And unlike 2019 or 2020, the finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman this time had absolute clarity in her mind. In the entire budget speech, one did not see any evidence of lack of confidence, any evidence of lack of focus, any evidence of lack of purpose. She was clear that I want growth. She was absolutely clear that it is not growth at any cost, but I'm going to deliver growth. Now let us understand that for delivering growth, you require a macroeconomic framework. Now the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act makes it mandatory for the budget documents to carry macroeconomic framework statement. This has been happening for the last 15 years. This year, the macroeconomic framework was far more significant than ever before. And the strategy for reviving growth was going to be very, very important. Now let us understand that this growth was not because of any global recession, because the global recession can be attributed to some factor. This was a pandemic. This was shutdown of economic activities. Now, the causes of negative growth were both internal and external. Now, under the circumstances, the only thing was to ensure that there is a substantial revival of demand and investment cycle. The evidence was that the consumption expenditure has dried up, the investment expenditure has dried up, and our problem was that this malaise we were suffering not just in 2020 when the pandemic struck. In 2019, our GDP growth rate had already dropped to 4%. The revised estimates show that our GDP growth was only 4% in 2019. We were growing at 8% only 3 years ago. So we had come down from 8% to 4%. In 2008 crisis, we were growing at 8%. Now we were growing at 4%. So that means, in the language of COVID, when we were hit by the COVID-19, we already had comorbidities. We already had problems in our internal economic health. Our manufacturing growth had disappeared. The manufacturing sector growth in 2019-20 was hardly 1%. So we therefore crashed. Our crash was because we were weak. Now, demand revival can take two forms. You can either put more money in the hands of the people, deepen their pockets so that they can spend. Now, income had dried up. So what do? Those who were having income, you reduce the burden on them by reducing the direct taxes and indirect taxes. That was the strategy which was used in 2008. 2% across the board excise reduction and the service tax reduction and income tax reductions and all sorts of reliefs were given. The other side is the expenditure side. Now, since there was already no tax revenue coming and huge shortfalls, the scope for giving tax relief was very, very limited. Unfortunately, the finance minister had already given out a huge package of tax reliefs to corporate sector in September 2019. So you couldn't have done anything more. Had she known that COVID is going to strike, probably she would not have thought in terms of that kind of a package in 2019 September and would have waited to do it in May or June 2020. But anyway, what was done was done. So it was unrealistic to expect that the finance minister would follow the route of tax concessions and reliefs to stimulate the economy, because there was no scope for that. So the only option left was the expenditure side. Now, the expenditure side, there are 5 components of expenditure. Any GDP equation will tell you that. The consumption expenditure, the investment expenditure, the government expenditure, and within government expenditure, you have consumption expenditure and capital expenditure, and finally exports. Now, all components were going down. So the only component that was positive was the government expenditure. But the fiscal deficit was a huge concern. So the first strategic decision that had to be taken was that shall we go by the sanctity of FRBM, or we will go by the needs of the hour in terms of putting the economy in place. And so FRBM had to be given a vacation. Now that required a political will. Luckily, the party had majority in the parliament, and therefore dealing with FRBM was not going to be a political challenge. It was more of an internal strategic challenge, because there are any number of guys who would say that you don't do this. And one of those who say this are the international credit rating agencies. They won't realize that there is no country in the world where fiscal deficit has increased dramatically during this year. But when it comes to India, the standards are different. So you had to say that let the credit rating agencies do what they want to do, and we don't care for them. We just don't care. Let them, we are in the lowest rung of investment grade, let them put us down further. That is their choice. In any case, for bulk of the first decade of this century, 21st century, we were not in investment grade. And still we were getting foreign investment. So why worry about it? Now, under these circumstances, I think the first choice that Nirmala Sitharaman made was that I'm not going to worry about fiscal deficit. And therefore, everybody was expecting that the revised estimates of fiscal deficit would be 6.5%. Some people said, no, it can be 7%. The government will not be very conservative. And when the numbers came, it took everybody by surprise that the fiscal deficit revised number was 9.5%. So from 3.5%, which was budgeted, to 9.5%. So 6% of GDP was the purse that was opened. We did not care. The other important thing is that we were criticized for not being transparent. Now, trust me, there are enough intelligent people around in the finance ministry who could have fudged the figures, manipulated the numbers, and showed the fiscal deficit of 7.5% when it was actually 9.5%. But as the finance minister said in her subsequent interactions with the media and others, that I decided not to push anything under the carpet and show everything. Therefore, this budget is outstanding in terms of the transparency. There is no fudging. I have gone through the budget documents over and over again, and I cannot tell you that there is evidence of any fudging this time around. So 9.5% is 9.5%. Now, once you can say 9.5%, even if it is 10.5%, you wouldn't have minded. So this budget is outstanding for its openness and transparency. Now, let us see that the huge shortfall in fiscal deficit, which was the budgeted deficit was a little under 8 lakh crores, and the actual turned out to be 18.5 lakh crores. So 10.5 lakh crores is the slippage. Now this 10.5 lakh crore comes from 4.5 lakh crore of revenue shortfall, 1.8 lakh crores of divestment target shortfall, and after such massive shortfalls in revenue, she still ensured that the expenditure increased by 4.1 lakh crores. So therefore, let me put it this way, more than 40% of the fiscal slippage is because of the pump priming of the economy. And that's the reason why we will see positive growth in third quarter and further positive growth in the fourth quarter of the current fiscal. This wouldn't have happened if this additional 4 lakh crore was not spent by the government. And another thing, the quality of fiscal deficit. The quality of fiscal deficit shows up by saying that normally whenever we were faced with fiscal deficit, we always controlled capital expenditure at the last moment. We will not sanction what is budgeted. We will avoid it. The March end effect will not be there. And therefore, the capital expenditure would be much lower than budgeted. And we will say that we have controlled fiscal deficit. This time around, the capital expenditure, the revised estimates of capital expenditure are 8 to 10% higher than the budget estimates. So capital expenditure has overshot, and actually the revenue expenditure has increased, obviously, because the cash subsidies will be given. Now, cash payout in terms of the cash component of this slippage is shown up in the form of subsidies. And if you look at the subsidies has overshot by 3.7 lakh crores. So out of the 4 lakh crore of extra expenditure, 3.7 lakh is consumed by subsidies. Much of it is in the form of direct cash transfer in the hands of the recipients. Now, let me finally say that this was done to ensure that we fell, but we can get up. Because if you don't spend in 2021, you would not get up. Now that we get up, how can you run? The running depends upon how conservative you are in terms of your expenditure in the year 21-22. Now, the whole world was expecting that the finance minister would come up with a conservative fiscal deficit target of about 5%, which itself would be a big departure for many. But she has been bold and aggressive enough to say that no, my fiscal deficit is 6.8%. So she has already spent almost 2% more than what many people were expecting. Now, it is this which will ensure that we will gather momentum in the year 21-22. Now, let me come to the macroeconomic framework. Now, economic survey had clearly predicted that the GDP in the year 21-22 is likely to expand by 11%. The real GDP growth of 11% is what was predicted by economic survey. And Subramaniam in his various press conferences elaborated on that. Coupled with the RBI target of 4% inflation, this would give you a GDP, nominal GDP growth of about 15.5%. Nirmala Sitharaman has gone for conservative estimates. So what is underlying the budget is a real GDP growth of 10% and inflation of 4%, which implies 14.4. 14.4 is 10 plus 4 plus 4% of 10. That is how you get 14.4. So that is the growth rate that she has predicted. Whereas economic survey had predicted a growth rate of 15.4. So she has assumed 1% less nominal GDP growth. That is where the cushion has been built. So conservatism. You are not overstating revenues to reduce deficit. Standard practice of fudging is overstate revenues, understate expenditures, and therefore say that my deficit is small. That is not what has been done. Now, I personally believe, because many people are asking that 6.8% is already going overboard, and you are not going to be able to maintain this. Just as from 3.5, you went to 9.5 this year. Similarly, 6.8 can easily become 8% or more. No chance is what I want to say, and I want to say that firmly. Why? Because the first thing, economic survey itself was conservative in saying that we are going to grow by 11%. I'm confident that with this budget, achieving a 12% growth of real GDP is absolutely possible and is going to happen. In fact, I would not be surprised if the real GDP growth turns out to be 14%. Real GDP growth in 21-22 turns out to be 14%. We can cross-check that next year. But if the real GDP growth is around 14% and inflation is around 4%, then we are talking about 18.5% nominal GDP growth as against 14.5 that has been assumed, which means there is a possibility of 2% to 4% extra nominal GDP growth in 21-22. Now that in itself implies that the tax revenues which are calculated on the basis of 14% growth are not likely to fall short of the target. because the actual growth is going to be more. Now, in this country, after recession, when there is a rebound and whenever the things have gone up, acceleration of growth has brought in tax buoyancy, and elasticity of tax revenue is generally 1.1 to 1.2, which means that a 1% GDP growth leads to 1.1% to 1.2% growth in tax revenue. Now, this year, the revenue is predicted to grow at 14%, 14.4% to be precise, and revenue calculations presented by Nirmala Sitharaman show a tax revenue growth of 15%, which basically means that she has assumed an elasticity of almost 1. Now, if the nominal GDP is actually going to increase by 16 to 18%, then there will be possibility of tax revenues growing by 16 to 18% if you assume elasticity to be 1. So there is a 3% underestimation of tax revenue which is built into the budget. And I feel that additional revenue of around 50,000 crores, tax and non-tax receipts both put together, is possible. I'm not saying it will happen, but it is possible, which rules out the shortfalls in some components of taxes, which will be more than made up by other components of taxes. Similarly, if the GDP growth is 4% more than what is predicted, then it generates a fiscal space of about 50 to 60,000 crores. 4% is 9 lakh crore of extra purchasing power. 6.8% of 9 lakh crores would be about 60,000 crores. So if you combine the underestimation of tax revenue and this, then put together, you are talking about a cushion of 1 lakh crore. Now that 1 lakh crore of cushion ensures that even if your fiscal deficit goes up more than the budgeted estimates by a margin of 1 lakh crore, even then your 6.8% will be maintained. So 6.8% target is unlikely to be breached. Let me also come to the divestment issue. Last time when 2.1 lakh crore target was given, there was no preparedness. It was just a target that was given, wishful thinking that the bureaucracy and the IAS officers and everybody will respond wonderfully and everything will happen, which did not happen. All sorts of hurdles, all sorts of administrative issues and so on and so forth. Plus market went down in the first half of the year. Luckily, this time she has given a long list. Air India onwards, BPCL, Air India, the whole lot of things, where entire groundwork has been done. Expression of interest have been received. We are just going to kickstart the process. She has asked Niti Aayog to prepare another list. She has already said that 2 banks will be nationalized. 2 banks will be privatized and will be divested, and plus 1 insurance company, general insurance company, will be divested. If you put, and top of that, the LIC issue, IPO of LIC. Now that LIC, 10% is what is planned. Now, if you add up all this, just simply do an Excel sheet calculation. 1.75 lakh crore divestment target, to my mind, is not only realistic, but perhaps it is erring on the side of being conservative. Implementation and execution should not be a problem. There are structural reforms that she has hinted at in the divestment process in this budget speech. And therefore, I believe that administrative hurdles this time around should not be there. Political hurdles is not going to matter. So therefore, I would not be surprised if, like what happened in 2017, we overshoot the divestment target this time. At that time, the target was 80,000 crores and we achieved 84. So this time we can. I'm not saying we will, but we can. So there is unlikely to be a shortfall in the divestment target. Now, what is it that is then going to deliver and spur growth? Out of several budget proposals, the ones which have struck me most, the thrust on infrastructure was obvious. I mean, that the government expenditure, especially if it is capital expenditure, had to go there. So the new infrastructure development financial institution, now this country has had development finance institutions, but this new infrastructure development financial institution will have several advantages. One, its own framework will require that the staff will have subject matter expertise. We are not talking about financial experts. We are talking about those with knowledge of infrastructure. Secondly, initial equity contribution of the government is 20,000 crores. So initial capitalization, recapitalization ka sawal nahi hai, this is capitalization, is 20,000 crores, injection. And you are targeting 5 lakh crore lending business within next 3 years. So on an average about 1.5 lakh crore per year. Now, infrastructure is an area where internal rate of return, profitability calculation is important, but social rate of return, what is called economic rate of return, is equally important. And there are many projects which are to be funded by public bodies which do not meet the criteria of IRR, and therefore banks find it difficult to do the viability report, and you have to do arm twisting. Now, this development financial institution will not have those constraints, and therefore the economic rate of return criteria will overrule the internal rate of return criteria, and they can still finance. That is the role which I expect this development financial institution to play, and that will act as a catalyst to generate other infrastructure investments which are related and pivoting around this basic social infrastructure that you create. Therefore, this is a great idea, and believe me, it is going to deliver. We have learned from our mistakes. The second important proposal is the new asset reconstruction and management company, the so-called bad bank, which we debated endlessly. She has taken the bold step of implementing it. This time there is no committee. This time there is no that they will submit report, and this institution has been created. That's it, period. Now the legislation will come. So now there are many who are comparing this with RSEALs. There are several RSEALs which are working in this country. They don't have scale and they have their own problems. So RSEAL as a concept has not really worked that much. So because it did not work, so this is not going to work. Now that is nonsense. Because first time, there is a coordinated exercise by Finance Ministry, Reserve Bank of India, and Association of Public Sector Banks. They are coming together to do this. Whose assets are being transferred? It is the PSU banks. Who has to do the regulatory supervision? It is RBI. And who has to create an enabling environment? It is the Finance Ministry. Now the three are coming together to do this. So by definition, the chances of failure are much less. Secondly, the scope and scale are going to be much wider than all RSEALs put together. It is for this reason that there is euphoria in the market. It is true that the market was suffering from fear psychosis. That, here is a finance minister who with a very provocative red cloth in the hand will come with a big danda and finish everybody off. She comes with a red cloth, danda is not to be seen, she smiles and passes by. So doesn't do anything. Now, therefore, the market relished. A sigh of relief. But more than that, please remember that the market crashed. COVID, how will it affect? Business is shut down. Therefore, there are non-performing assets. So banks shut down. And therefore, refinancing doesn't happen. New credit doesn't come. New enterprises don't get created. And that's the end of the matter. Now, banks' balance sheets over a period of 3 years will get cleaned up. That is the reason why she provided only 20,000 crores of recapitalization for the really weak banks. She's going to privatize 2 of them. So therefore, she doesn't have to provide recapitalization for them. Now, in this scenario, large chunk of bad loans, non-performing assets will get transferred. And believe me, there is huge amount of foreign investors' interest in this bad bank. There is demand for stressed assets the world over. It's not a new thing. And so let us not have doomsday prediction. This idea is going to work. The market is convinced about it. Let me tell you, मारेगा इसके डर से जनरल मार्केट डाउन हो सकता है. Then why is Bank Nifty jumping like this? Bank Nifty is the craziest performer out of the entire lot. Now why? That is because market believes that this idea has been well thought through and is going to work. Then huge incentive for health. Now health sector, automobile industry, housing industry, all of this, if they are not backed up by insurance, then they don't perform. And our weak link in the Indian economy is insurance. Our insurance services are not global standard. Our insurance services are not qualitatively, scale-wise, not of the global standard. Our penetration of insurance in this country is amongst the lowest in the large countries of the world. So you are opening up insurance sector. FDI limit raised from 49% to 74%. With adequate safeguards for governance. Like I was pleasantly surprised that these FDIs, when they come and put 74%, they would want their own board of directors. So she said, fine, you go ahead and do that. But all your directors have to be resident Indian directors in Indian insurance companies. And 50% of them has to be independent directors. That means they should not get paid by you. Now, these checks and balances are going to matter. And remember, the remaining 26% is with the owner, and the owner's representatives will also be there on the board. So let us not worry too much about this. The pros and cons are there for every proposal, but the pros are more than cons. And I think that this has the capacity to dramatically transform our insurance sector. This can be a game changer for Indian insurance business. And finally, the net borrowing limit for states, which was increased to 4% of gross state domestic product, has been retained and extended for the financial year 21-22. So states have been also told that don't worry about your fiscal deficits, you can borrow and finance your capital expenditure. Now, finally, the long-term roadmap, she has said categorically that I'm not going to hasten up the process of fiscal consolidation. From 9.5%, I have projected 6.8 this year. But from 6.8%, I'm not going to return to 3% in the next 2-3 years. No, she has said that in 25-26 financial year, which is 4 years from now, my fiscal deficit would be 4.5%. 4.5% in 25-26. Now, if we continue to grow, this year we will grow, let us say by 15-16% nominal GDP. Next year, we will not grow that much. So maybe 12%. Following year, maybe 11%. But if I look at it like this for 4 years, our nominal GDP in 25-26 will be 60% more than the nominal GDP today. Therefore, 4.5% of 60% higher nominal GDP in 25-26 will give you an absolute fiscal deficit, which will be 10% more than the 15 lakh crores provided this year. So she has assured the market that I'm not going to pull the strings. My expenditure liberalization is going to continue for 4 years. Government is going to spend. So she has laid out a development strategy for the next 4 years. That is another reason why the markets are enthused, that next year it's not going to be a cut. And finally, after all this, the scenario is that of euphoria. I think the morale is high. I would not be surprised if we achieve better than 4.4% nominal, 14.4% nominal GDP growth and better than 10% real GDP growth. Our current account balance will remain healthy. Our trade deficit will remain under control. Our inflation, December numbers are lower than November numbers, which is very encouraging. In fact, our wholesale price index inflation is only 1.2% for December. So people say that high fiscal deficit will result in inflation. First of all, it will result more in inflation of WPI than CPI. And WPI is at 1.2%. Now, even if that 1.2% becomes 4%, heavens are not going to fall. On the contrary, it will act as a stimulus for manufacturing sector. So I don't think that this fiscal deficit is going to be inflationary of the magnitude that people worry. And therefore, the negative effects will be there, but the negative effects are manageable. So this budget lays the foundation for long-term sustainable growth. The target of 6.5% growth for GDP that has been set by the economic advisor for 22-23 might appear conservative depending upon the performance of 21-22. And I feel, therefore, that this budget in a post-COVID scenario may be one of the best budgets that any emerging market economy would have seen. And it will lay a very strong foundation for India to bounce back. We are going to turn from the worst performing economy in 2021 to the best performing economy in 21-22. We will become the fastest growing economy in the world in 21-22. It is like losing the first test in Australia, getting all out for 36 runs, and then bouncing back in the next test, winning it against all odds. That required planning, strategy, aggression, focus. All of these have characterized this budget. And therefore, I'm happy with this budget. Full marks to the finance minister for steering the economy out of very difficult times. I hope and pray that many of the things I have said turn out to be true. I'm sure all of you would be delighted if that happens. Thank you very much.